We are now live on YouTube. The roll call. Thank you. Member Bartlesmeyer, Councilmember Brost,
Here.
Member Delante, Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Member Sturman,
Here.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Here.
Member Berger,
Here.
Councilmember Bernalino, Member Patton,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo, Member Bramman, Councilmember Hopper, Member Donaldson, Councilmember Galani, Co-Chair Holthouse,
Here.
and Co-Chair Farmer.
Here.
Thank you.
Carol, you want to start with some remarks, or you want?
Just thank the people that were able to attend tonight for squeezing it into that, busy stretch between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We've had a couple of notable things I think happen in the last month that included planting a tree in memory of Dr. Hammer's son over at Community Park, which he was, I think, those who were there would agree with me, very, very touched by the gesture. And it's in a very prominent place past the parking lot as you come around the curve with a nice plaque. And I think it'll be a wonderful asset for anybody in the community, and a really special memento for people that know the story behind it. I think a little later in the agenda, we'll get to our meeting with Senator Schwartz and some of the steps we've taken to advance our initiative with Evergreen Subdivision. So that's all I got to kick this off.
All right. Well, I guess let's get started then. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting, or anybody have any questions or concerns about them?
I'll make the motion to approve.
All right. Do we have a second? Mr. Brost. All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Our meeting minutes are approved. Carol or Joe, do you guys want to talk about what do we got up here first? Or is there anybody? I don't assume there's anybody with public comment or anything in the chat.
Mr. Chair, we did not receive any written comments prior to tonight's meeting, and right now there are 0 attendees.
All right, well, that makes that pretty easy. What about, do we want to talk about our efforts for the calendar year 2022? That Carol or Joe or any of us in particular?
Well, Mr. Chair, with Madam Chair's permission, I can address the first item on the agenda.
Great.
And as the task force members are aware, one of the first major initiatives of the group was to begin an outreach with our residents that live near creeks, drainage ways, etc., or have floodplain as part of their property, and ask them to provide feedback on, are they experiencing problems? And if so, what are the nature of the problems? And is it getting worse? Is it staying static, etc.? We got a great response from the community, and the response primarily was focused in the Fox Creek watershed, but we did receive them from Bottom Creek watershed, Fox Creek watershed, etc. We cataloged that information, and the information is available, and ultimately it was put in a format that was readily accessible for MSD, and MSD did receive it, so that in the future, if they do come to a city council meeting here in the city of Wildwood and say there's only 2 projects on their list for future action, that will change. There's now 80 plus projects that have been identified as part of the city of Wildwood. The shortfall in all of this has been once we received that information, we did not follow up with them in a timely manner. And earlier this year, the task force recognized that situation and wanted city personnel to begin the process of re-engaging those participants. Initially, Dr. Hammer was going to be the lead in that with support from the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning. About that same time, the untimely passing of Dr. Hammer's son occurred, and it kind of derailed the effort. So tonight, the Department of Planning and the Department of Public Works are presenting to the task force a request. We would like to prepare a draft letter, which the task force can certainly see, review, and edit, that we would like to send back out to those 80 or so property owners, advising them of why the delay, what has been occurring during that period of time from their first contact to the city, and then what we expect to achieve in 2022. The letter will be our introduction, not the only step in the process, but the introduction. And then thereafter, as we had talked internally when we were getting ready to do this earlier in the year, we'll actually go out and meet with the individual property owners, do an assessment of the changes, take down their thoughts, their concerns, and then add that to the database that we have and just make it better if in the future funding is available, either internally here at the City of Wildwood, through outside sources such as the federal government, or through the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. So tonight, the departments are respectfully requesting authorization to prepare that draft letter. Thank you.
All right. Would anybody like to discuss that further, or would anybody like to make a motion to start working on this letter? Lauren?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion as presented by the department, and then after you get a second, I do have a couple of comments about the document attached.
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Unberg. Lauren, go ahead.
Yes, I know we've talked about this before, and I'm not sure if it was didn't happen either because of a lack of enthusiasm in terms of agreement, or if it's just everyone was really busy and the ball got dropped. But in terms of public education, with the memo that was attached for efforts in year 2022, I still think it's a lost opportunity if we don't have a booth at the next Celebrate Wildwood event, and I think it's a lost opportunity to not try to hit maybe the farmers markets as well with a volunteer with a stream table. Certainly HPC has been really successful. It's a very heavily visited booth at Celebrate Wildwood. There are large banners that have displays of historic communities, and I think that it would be really successful if we had a large banner that would have a map of the watersheds. People like learning about it. You're getting a different audience than you would get at an HOA meeting, because remember, that's great to have an HOA education session, but the majority of residents don't attend HOA meetings. Most of the time they don't even have a quorum and still continue to have business. So you are getting a different group of people that otherwise wouldn't have information. And if the goal is to try to educate people that don't just live on a creek bank, that's a good opportunity to do so. The other thing I noticed on the letter under what you can do now, I think it would be a good time to go ahead and add some of the things that we've learned in the committee, which if you have any honeysuckle on your property or other invasive species, that you want to go ahead and remove that. Or that the HOA needs to remove that along the creek bank. You can also encourage people to plant native species or native grasses that retain rainfall and slow draining into the creek bed. So under what you can do now, people can do different types of landscapings or rain gardens or things like that. I would add that to the list if nobody has objections.
All right.
And I guess the comment I would make is there was a draft that was actually quite a bit longer. And when we looked at it, we thought we kind of overwhelmed people perhaps with information about, improving detention basins and, planting trees and stabilizing banks. And So, with all of 10 or 15 minutes of deliberation after a meeting with Senator Swartz, we kind of cut it back to just more of a, get yourself involved with, I think to build on what you're saying with the thought that we needed to get more organized about an ongoing campaign that just fed bullets out of, honeysuckle. Today, the message is honeysuckle. Next week or next month, it's about, planting native species. The month after that, it's maybe about rain barrels or whatever those things, and maybe, I think that the detention basin issue is something that needs some explaining, and it's not something an individual can take action on. So maybe for those sorts of topics, we find a different mechanism. But I think your point's well taken, that there's a lot more we could, a lot more information we could get to people. I think the challenge is figuring out what level of information you can feed at one time and have people not just go, it's too much information, I'll set that aside, or I'll throw that in the trash immediately. So the letter to Evergreen, I think was kind of seen as a piece of maybe a media campaign. And I think, your ideas about, is it booze and banners? Is it, doing something with the email distribution list we've got? Is it things on the website? Is it letters to residents? What is really going to move this forward, I think, is a good question. And I think we've got more to do in 2022 than, send out a letter to trustees and, get back to the people that filled out the survey, for sure. So I don't know, I have no objection to adding that to this letter. I just would also like to make sure that we don't lose an opportunity sort of as we start the new year and there's maybe a new budget available for our efforts, that we don't, kind of take a pretty global look at what are all the things we're doing and where do we have opportunities that we should be, prioritizing for next year.
And just to ask a clarifying question to staff, are we paying for the Evergreen letter, or is this something we drafted that the HOA is paying for?
This is my understanding. We'll send them a draft version of the letter, and then they'll circulate it to their the household.
And that's easier because if they can walk it, they maybe don't have to pay for postage, and they can knock on doors and talk to people, and that's a good time to have a verbal education, rather than if we mailed it, which we would want to include as much as we could if we're paying for postage. But I think the way it reads right now is, what can you do? Not much. I think that another actionable item, it just helps with people's stress, right? Because then if they choose not to cut honeysuckle, they know they didn't do it and they could be helping. So I mean, 2 more bullet points couldn't really hurt, but that's my opinion. But
don't disagree. And I just want to make sure that we all are kind of, at least in the back of our minds, thinking about, what should those other activities we do in 2022 be. So.
All right. Well, we got a first and a second for this stuff. Shall we go ahead and proceed with our vote as to whether or not we want to press forward with this letter? All in favor?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Either maybe I didn't get it, but there doesn't seem to be any ending to that letter. Did I miss a page? Or in other words, there's no thank you, there's no we'll keep you informed, it's not signed by anybody. It just, I thought maybe a piece was missing. Maybe it just hasn't been drafted yet. That I'm just asking.
So with the Evergreen letter, it's really just designed as a template for HOAs. So rather than having us sign off and have a closing note on it, we're leaving that up to the HOA to kind of frame that how they would normally frame those things.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right, all those in favor of moving forward with this letter, please say aye.
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 I,
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? All right, Mr. Vunich, it looks like you guys can get to work on this letter.
and we'll have the draft for the task force at the J.
Awesome. Okay, moving forward, unless Carol, is there anything else you wanted to touch on with that?
The only other comment I would make is just to reinforce what you said, Joe, that if anybody is involved with, as a trustee or involved with what's going on in their subdivision and know that there's a, letter going out about fill in the blank and, there'd be an opportunity to maybe encourage them to put something on the back of that piece of paper or insert a second piece of paper that, we're hoping that this is just the first subdivision that we engage in this way. So.
Yeah, and we're also, I know at least for my subdivision, and I'm reaching out to some of the other folks around me, but we're going to try to, for those subdivisions that have websites and things like that, we're going to try to get some links put on there, just directing them back to the task force so that they can we can start this conversation from a couple different directions. Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Just one more item, and I appreciate being recognized. In our conversations, as the co-chairs are aware, we've talked a lot about what are we going to do as the task force moves into 2022. And we have a lot of irons in the fire. Obviously, we have the Wilson Hydro, our consultant, working on the permitting for 4 locations, those critical locations that have been identified. We're close to having the USGS begin the 2-year study. I believe that'll be in January of 2022. We're also very shortly going to have a proposal from Wilson Hydro to begin the actual design and engineering for permitting purposes, for bidding purposes, and construction restoration, whatever the case may be. But I think there's a consensus amongst the co-chairs and at least the departments of planning and public works that for the first part of the year, while all that is underway, we should really start focusing on some public education as has been discussed here. So I think one of the items you'll see at the January meeting, besides the draft letter, is a collective kind of data dump from the co-chairs and us to you, the task force members, of what we think we can do in terms of public education, simple things to the more complex. And so we can start maybe checking those off the list. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Updates for the pre-permitting process.
Well, again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the task force, I've been in conversation with Joe Wilson of Wilson Hydro, and they are underway on the first of the 3 critical locations. Given workload and the holidays, I hope to have something in January in terms of just a more detailed update. I did have a conversation with Mr. Wilson today regarding the 4th location. And Mr. Wilson had several questions that I'd like to just relay to you and kind of the direction I think we should go with, obviously, all of your input as well as the Department of Public Works. The first question related to the highlands at Wild Horse, that depositional area that's causing problems for the common ground and continuing to plague that side of the bank. Mr. Wilson's opinion is that the best approach to that would not only be the depositional area, but also downstream, where we're having the threat approaching Strecker Road and the bridge on Strecker Road, as well as that sharp upstream bend where we're having that problem with the manhole and the removal of riprap rock. I think the expanded approach is probably the best approach. It's a more expensive approach, but at least we can break it into 3 parts and look at it from that perspective. And the other dealt more with if we were to do the expanded approach, just the timing associated with it. And the point of the department is that we'd like to have all four kind of track together. So I guess the question to all of the task force members is, or the questions to the task force members are, is the expanded approach relative to the project, those three components versus one, acceptable? And then if there is a bit of delay for the first three to catch the fourth up, is that acceptable? And so those are the questions I have for you tonight. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Edens, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I've certainly talked a lot about this because this is in Ward 2. And just so you guys know, I'm not, we've had a lot of turnover on the committee, but there were some separate documents produced on the Highlands, so there's lots of pictures. But what Joe is talking about is there's a section with what's close to a bank blowout and an area where MSD can't keep their storm drains and major infrastructure covered because of the erosion. So that's what he meant by riprap and large boulders. So there's now mainline sewer trunks that keep getting exposed. As you go down the bend and water speeds up, there's an area with common ground bank blowout, and I'm not expecting the city to pay for common ground fixing. This all started because they didn't want to spend money as an HOA if it was going to happen again. And what I learned from walking with Dr. Hammer is if we repaired the public sections of the creek, that it would be less likely for it to blow out. So as you come around the bend, then you hit the Strecker Road bank and the Strecker Road Bridge that we own. So the way I see it, the expanded approach makes sense because my biggest concern, and I explained this to the HOA, is I do care that your common ground is disappearing, but my concern as an elected official is to maintain the roads and bridges before I ever worry that your tennis court floods. There's a collective we problem, and that road and bridge that we spent all that money on do need to be maintained. So I think it makes sense to do the bigger approach, and I certainly know Dr. Hammer, when he evaluated that in mind, it was to preserve the road and bridge starting upstream where MSD is, and again, we've talked to MSD, we've reported it, they're not going to fix it, but starting where those lines are exposed, coming around the bend, that was the goal, is that we wouldn't be able to protect the road and bridge without kind of going backwards. So I would really support the expanded approach.
All right, anybody else? Okay. Mr. Vunis, you need, I guess, a motion to move forward on the expanded approach, or just a red general sign off, but okay, what would you like?
I think if there's not an objection, just a motion second and a voice vote, that way I'll feel comfortable. And again, I'll try to ensure that we're doing it in components so you can see that the individual cost of the three components and then the total amount. That way, if we have to make difficult choices, we'll know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
And I will make the motion, but if it could be really, when you're talking about those three components, so I know when it comes up onto that bank, if there is a separate cost and they could delineate, like if the HOA wanted to pay for repairs on their own ground, here's what we think it would cost. So let's separate the private group out, and then because they don't, as you know, my understanding is their HOA doesn't extend into the actual creek bed. So then if there's a section that we would be responsible for the city on Part B, so both of this is Part B, that is a separate line item so I can see the public taxpayer responsibility.
I'll make sure that Mr. Wilson is aware that we're just talking about the depositional area within the banks of the creek, and any other costs would be outside that.
Yeah, and certainly just like we, gave information to Evergreen or other subdivisions, I would love to pass along what we would recommend the improvement being to their private property. That's fine. But yeah, I'll make the motion.
All right, so we've got a motion. Would anybody like to second the motion?
I'll second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Sturman. All those in favor of moving forward here with the expanded planning, I guess I would call it, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? All right, Mr. Vunich, you may proceed.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the support.
Is there any other pre-permitting pieces you'd like to go over?
Well, just again, we've got a bit of a start on the first three. We'll probably get a start now on this fourth one sometime in the next week, hopefully. So I'll have a better idea of timing at the January meeting, but hopefully we can catch everything up and have 4 projects together versus 3 plus 1.
Great. Okay. Moving forward to the work program matrix for the rest of this year and into next.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And just very quickly, I'm just going to highlight a couple of items. Added to the matrix is item 1, parenthetical A, and that's the public outreach we just discussed. So I think you'll see that being expanded as we go forward through the first part of 2022. The departments also updated the matrix to reflect now 4 critical locations that are going through the pre-permitting process. And I think that's very important as well. And then I think the major item that I'm going to let the co-chairs explain is the meeting with Senator Schatz that occurred at the urging of the task force and with the cooperation and the logistics from our city administrator, Steve Cross, and our mayor, Mayor Bolin. So with that, I'll conclude and I'll let the co-chairs take it from here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vunich. So we had, I think, by all accounts, a very good meeting with Senator Schatz the other day. This was a meeting that, we have tried to get on the books here for a while, and thankfully we were able to kind of squeak it in right after the holiday, I guess it was. And what I think I would be comfortable saying, and those of you that were also in attendance, please correct me if I misspeak here, but I think what we found was a very receptive state senator who is certainly, to a little bit of my surprise, was really much better versed in this topic than I was expecting him to be. And he was super receptive to what we were talking about. And we're going to work now on getting our next steps put together with a little bit of a wider meeting with us, MSD, the senator, and a couple other parties, if we can get that to work out. But most importantly, us and MSD, as we just may have a little bit of money to make some of these things happen. We don't certainly have any guarantees. There's some more steps down that we have to go through here. And certainly all of this is contingent on a lot of different things. But I do think, at least when I was leaving that meeting, I felt very good at the possibility that for sure, I felt like there was perhaps a little bit of a light at the end of this very long tunnel that we've been working on here for the last couple of years. So I was super pleased with that. Everybody that was involved, from the presentation that, Joe and Travis put together to, Mayor Bolin and Steve and Carol, I think that we really hit all of the high points, and we tied this together as, certainly, while it is a Wildwood issue, it is a larger issue than just that. So hopefully we'll be able to get some money rolling in here pretty quickly. And I think as we kind of move forward, and at least to this point anyways, it was slightly rewarding to know that we've put time and energy and money into getting some of these studies done and to start moving this process forward, so that it is, if what seems to be the case is possible, that perhaps some of this federal money or some other things will make their way to us here in relatively short order, we will be good to proceed. Does everybody feel like that's a pretty fair assessment?
Yeah, and I would echo what you said, Joe, that I think it was really important that we proceeded with identifying specific projects, having cost estimates, saying the permits will be in place. I don't know whether it was encouraging or discouraging to know that there's actually still unallocated money from, the first wave of federal largesse that was issued, almost a year ago now. So I think there's money around. And I think that the good news and the bad news is the senator realized, the problems are significant in Wildwood, but also understands this is not the only place where this is happening. So, once money is designated for that purpose, there's going to, be a lot of communities raising their hands. But the fact that we've done all the work we have, I think will help move us to the front of the line. So,
Yeah,
I was encouraged that funding might be out there, and I was also, very pleased that I think we positioned ourselves well for.
we did, and I want to actually specifically thank you, Mr. Sturman, because without your very deep work and your very intense spreadsheet, where we could, at every time when he would ask, well, what about these people? We would be like, yeah, we talked to them too. Well, what about these people? We had that conversation as well.
Mhm.
It really helped us to simplify this conversation a great deal, that there is no unturned stone. We have shaken every tree that exists, and this is the last tree that we've got left to shake. So that was immensely helpful. So thank you very much for all of that hard
Yep.
work.
And we kind of went back and forth on expanding it to, the entire committee or selected members, and it just came together so quickly that, Joe and I were lucky we could get there. So,
Yeah.
It was so we hope we represented all of you well, but we certainly did make it clear we were just the the talking heads for the real talent and hard work that was behind a large group of people working together. So,
Yeah, Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. I just wanted to add a couple things. First of all, the question that was posed to the senator was if, in fact, there were some allocated money from the ARPA tranche, which is the second one. So that money is relatively new. In fact, the city received half of our allocation just within the last month and a half, and we'll get our second one 12 months from now. So this is still fairly new money that they're still trying to allocate. The senator threw out a figure of $2.5 million. We were hoping for him to write a check right then and there. He did not, but didn't preclude us from asking anyway. But we will have that follow-up meeting. But the main thing that I wanted to point out is that the mayor himself spoke directly to Ms. Holthouse and Mr. Farmer and complimented them immensely on the job that they did because this was their meeting to run. Mr. Vunich and myself interjected when it was appropriate with a piece of information or a question or something, but primarily the presentation and all the detail was provided by your co-chairs, who did an unbelievably job. In fact, the mayor asked them if they had practiced their presentation prior to, but they did not. They hit every point that was necessary to point out to the senator. So this committee can be very, very grateful and proud of the job that your co-chairs did in presenting this to the senator and his aide.
Thanks. Yeah, it all came together very well, and it's all of everybody's here's work getting all this stuff done to get us the information to be able to ask the right questions and answer the questions when asked. So that worked out great, and hopefully we will be able to continue this trend and maybe get one or two of these projects moving forward in a very real way. That would be the best thing. Lauren.
Yeah, two things. It sounds like it went super well. Did you get to take them out in person to the area like behind Anniversary Park? Did they get to go into the creek?
So we didn't go into the creek at that point, but actually I think at the end of the day, the pictures that we were putting together, the deck, so to speak, was put together in such a way where we started with an aerial and then we moved to a photo and then a different photo where you can really start to see these problems start to amplify. So we still, would certainly like to get some folks out in the creek, but I think it was very, very clear to me that they were able to grasp at least a portion of some of the severity of what we've got going on. And we approached it as we're here to fix a Wildwood problem, but we're also here to hopefully be the voice of a lot of people to get this thing fixed, because whether we fix our part or not, there's still other parts of this watershed that are all connected. So it's going to perhaps become a much larger initiative. Who knows? The most important thing to us is, can we get a couple of these things moving forward? So I think, as we go through this, if the weather cooperates, perhaps we'll be able to get down in that creek and really let them see it in person. But candidly, as long as they're on board with what we're doing and they're willing to help, put some financing behind what needs to happen, they don't have to go see the creek if they don't want to. Our pictures pretty much speak for themselves. So
Yeah, results are results. I will say it being in there feels different and looks different than the picture, especially to
Yep.
scale. The pictures with Dr. Hammer's son and the height difference are especially good, but it might help them say to another senator whose votes are trying to get, you know what, I've been there myself, and that gives them a unique opportunity to talk about it. But the other thing I wanted to add, because we've talked about this on council in context of money for rural internet, but I don't think this committee has talked about it, and if we have, I apologize, but getting federal infrastructure dollars would be phenomenal for this, because it does not count towards our $4 million cap.
right.
Which means we could spend the money without it going towards a ballot initiative, which is a really big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, we certainly had a very specific ask in terms of a few of our critical issues and a specific dollar amount. And I think that the mayor had a good idea about trying to make this work with a couple different parties put together to make sure everybody's moving this thing forward. But I did ask that question at the end. I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak, and say, hey, we want to do this little thing when it's a much bigger issue. So, we will certainly have more of those conversations as we go through. And we made it very clear that was what was up. Yes, sir, Mr. Cross.
Just to provide an answer for Ms. Edens, right now the government is still dealing with the first tranche was the CARES, the Corona virus, whatever CARES stood for. I don't recall anymore. That was the first tranche, and the city got its portion. The second tranche was the ARPA, which was the American Recovery Plan Act, where the city has received half of its allocation. It'll get the other one. The next tranche, or the next, to use Ms. Holthouse terminology, the largesse from the government will in fact be the infrastructure bill, and that is moving along, at a reasonable pace within the government. To be sure, the city of Wildwood will share in those funds. To the extent, I have no idea, and what the rules will be, I have no idea. But there will be some money that flows to the city, and that's package exceeds $1 trillion. So there will be money that will flow to the state. There will be money that will flow to the county, and there will be money that will flow to the individual municipalities in the same fashion that it would appear that the ARPA funds came. So that is something that I've been saying to this committee for quite some time, that the most likely scenario was money that was either going to come from the state, their allocation of the ARPA money, and that's what we talked to with the senator last week, but also the big chunk that I believe will definitely help what we're trying to do here will come from that infrastructure bill, because this clearly is right smack in the middle of what that infrastructure bill is intended to provide relief for. So I have no idea when that's going to happen, but it's moving along. So we shall see. But there will be funds available that we can use for these erosion issues that we're dealing with. I'm pretty confident.
Yep. All right. Carol, you got anything else on our meeting?
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
just wish everybody a safe and healthy holiday season, and I think a new year is always a time to sort of regroup and zoom out and look at lofty goals, as well as very specific tactics next year. So if folks have ideas, like Lauren shared about, hey, I think it's it's really important work at the farmers markets or at Celebrate Wildwood, please feed those in, and we'll try to put that into the work matrix and turn the crank and set set the priorities and see what comes out first. But encourage you to keep those cards, letters, ideas, emails coming. And we've come a long way in a year, but and I really feel like we've got a foundation of the processes for hopefully a dramatic leap in 2022.
Yeah. Kind of speaking along those lines, just real quick, I guess maybe Steve, this is for you. If we were to do the farmers market or, Celebrate Wildwood, all that kind of stuff, and we did want to get some banners or whatever things made, how do we do that? Like pay for that stuff? I can't imagine it would be more than maybe a couple $100 to do that, but I don't know where that would come from.
That would come right out of Mr. Vunich's budget. He was
All right.
he knew what I was going to say. That's why he was smiling before you finished the sentence.
All right. Well,
Mr. Vunich has some money in his budget. We made sure of that. So it's a small amount of money, and we can take care of you.
So is it better, as we're kind of getting here towards the end of the year from a budget standpoint, I assume that if that money was there in 2021 and not spent, it just moves forward, or is it better for you guys if we try to, I can put some banners and things together that we can get printed off before here at the end of the year, if that makes your life easier?
It does not just move forward. Any unspent money needs to be earmarked with a purchase order for it to be able to roll into the following year. Otherwise, unspent money goes away. I don't know if Mr. Vunich has any money left in his 2021 budget, but if so, it would behoove you to, use that money for this type of thing. But otherwise, if it's not spent, it would be lost unless there was an order had been placed with a vendor or something, and there was a purchase order supporting that, and then that could carry over to 2022. But something this small, I think, if you have some ideas now, and again, I don't know how much is left in Mr. Vunich's budget for this type of thing. But if there's money there, we can spend it.
All right. Joe, you got a couple $100 stashed away somewhere?
I certainly do, sir.
Okay. Well, then I guess since this is our last meeting of the year, I'll just ask, for those of you that don't know, I design things all the time. So I'd be more than happy to put a couple banners together that we can use for events like that and get the bill over to Mr. Vunich before the end of the year, unless anybody objects, which is also okay. Anybody have any thoughts or feelings on that? Lauren?
It's not an objection, but one of the things I was talking about is there are ones that we had that were made that stand on their own. Yeah. And they have this plastic piece, and then we've left some of them up in City Hall sometimes before for HPC, but that's something that if it
I'm thinking I would definitely do a roll banner. I think they're about $150, and they pack away very nicely, and they're very sturdy, and they work inside and outside, and we can do all kinds of stuff with them.
And does somebody want to price a stream table at the same time?
To price a what table?
A stream table. Before we were going to have to borrow one. I don't know if Army Corps has ones that they loan out or donate, but if we have money for that, that might be a good opportunity to go ahead and invest in one.
Okay. Well, that one we can try to figure out, but the easy thing we can probably get done. It looks to me, if this is correct, just by Google, a stream table is about $600. So there's that. But we can look into that stuff as well. So, okay.
I'll tell you what, since you're the creative marketing guy, it sounds like the engineer co-chair would be the one to research stream tables. So I will.
Perfect. It looks like it's sand and it gets wet. So that's as far as I can go.
Do we need some kind of motion from the committee that, would support spending, up to $1,000 if the budget's available on banners, stream table? And I guess the other thing would be just some more color copies of some pamphlets and things that once we had people coming up to the banner and saying what this is about, we could send them away with something.
I think
I'll make the motion that we do as Carol just suggested.
Mr. Vunich and I would feel very comfortable if there was a motion made and seconded and a voice taken to spend X dollars, not to exceed assuming that there's money available in the budget. We cannot go,
Mhm.
we're not gonna spend money that we don't have.
Right.
Right.
But I think then we've got some documentation and support
Okay.
of that expenditure.
Okay.
I'll make that motion,
All right.
up to $1,000.
We got a motion for Mr. Ottenberg. Lauren, is that a
May I
second?
suggest it might need to be 1,500? Do you think? A couple of banners, I mean, that's a couple $100. If you did a string table, that's 600 plus tax. Any shipping fees, you're already at $1,000.
We're now.
We don't spend it.
On a couple $100 that this conversation started with, so I'm starting to feel a little uncomfortable with this now.
Yeah.
So
It's
let's
called
cut
inflation.
down just what, Joe? What'd you say?
It's called inflation.
Right.
I mean, if you don't spend it, you don't spend it. I just would hate to be, $50 short, and we didn't make that in the motion. So
So do you want to amend my motion?
I would like to amend the motion to 1,500,
Okay.
1,500.
And I think it's also constrained by the budget that's available
Well,
remaining this year.
Yeah, that's why the language is up to. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've got an amended motion. I guess do we need a second?
A second.
All right. Seconded by Mr. Sturman. Okay. All in favor of our amended motion, should the money be there in the budget to spend up to possibly $1,500 on some signage and maybe this fancy table, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, well, I will make sure to get you guys the part that I can do here before with the bill. I guess my only question is, I mean, I have services I use through work to do that. Do you guys need to like bid something like that out, or do I just say, hey, this is where I would suggest going and it's $135?
We don't bid something out that small. No.
Okay, cool.
Go right ahead.
Excellent. All right. Okay, I know we've got a little bit of stuff that was carried over from October, but I see some things crossing. I feel like we're probably in pretty good shape on that. So does anybody have anything else they'd like to add? I think we can. Yes, Mr. Vunich.
Just a reminder, our next meeting date will be Wednesday, January 26th of 2022.
All right. Well, then if there's nothing further from, yes, Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say thanks to Carol and Joe for volunteering to do some extra work, and just my advice would be to check with Joe, because I think Kathy may have already started some design stuff, or you may not have to reinvent the wheel, so they may have something for you that you can just change or reformat and make sure that they approve it and all that. Motion to close.
All right. All right, so that's, I think, non-debatable. All those in favor of adjourning our meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, everybody have a great end of the year. Happy holidays. Stay safe and stay warm. We'll see you guys next
Merry
year.
Christmas. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Buddy.
Same to you all.
Merry Christmas.